In this video, I'll be running through the pros, cons, and differences of using in-platform conversion lift experiments, like you would see within the Experiments tab of Meta, versus a geo-lift experiment using a third-party tool, using an out-of-package solution like Causal Impact, or using a third-party software like House. So let's start off on the left here with using an in-platform conversion lift experiment. What are the pros? What are the cons? Should you just run one or the other, or is there a place for both? Starting off with the pros here. Pro number one is that this is unbelievably easy to set up. You select a campaign that's currently active and running, and you apply a conversion lift experiment right on top of it, as long as it's hitting the budget requirements of running a conversion lift experiment. Then the platform just goes, delineates into a control and a treatment group, and starts running and collecting data. The second pro is that there's no manual data cleanup required. AKA, there's no real data scientist needed here. Okay, Meta does it all for you. And so really anyone can go and set one of these up. Number three is that it's relatively quick. And so you can run these on short-term campaigns, get a really quick turnaround on results. And once the experiment actually finishes, the data post-processes within a 1 to 2 week period. Now, what are the cons? Number one, this is completely reliant on attribution. Now, we have a lot of videos on the channel. In fact, one's called Why Attribution Does Not Matter. And so we are very much so of the opinion that attribution shouldn't be trusted to make business level decisions. It's definitely a data point that we can use as a source of triangulating the truth, but it's absolutely not the truth. And so when we're relying on simply attributed conversions within platform to be able to do a conversion lift study, there are going to be inherent error bars around the result. Number two is it's completely black boxed in terms of we don't get any data except for the output, which is the percentage confidence alongside the incremental conversions and the incremental blended CAC and ROI. And that's it. We don't actually get to see behind the data set and get any transparency. And then number three, because this is inherently just a conversion lift experiment within Meta that's reliant on attribution and that is black boxed, we have a limitation in terms of not being able to include other channels. And so this is really just restricted down into what's occurring on the Meta platform, but obviously the data could be getting impacted by things that are occurring off platform on other platforms, but that isn't considered within the test. Now you could also argue, and this starts to go outside my domain of expertise, that a difference of difference analysis has cons and pros as well. And so a geo-lift experiment is not what is happening when a conversion lift experiment is occurring within the Meta platform. Instead, a difference in difference experiment is occurring. What is the difference between those two? Well, when you run a geo-lift experiment, you're taking one particular state or area and you're increasing or decreasing spend within that state, depending on whether you're doing a holdout experiment or an inverse holdout experiment. With difference in difference, you are taking everyone that could be in the same area, but you're splitting at an individual user level. Now that has advantages in itself, and to be honest, that's almost an entire video, and we can loop back to this at the end. But fundamentally, people might see a difference in difference lift experiment as inferior or superior, depending on the individual use case. Coming over here to the pros and cons of using a geo-lift experiment that sits outside of the platform. The number one pro is that you're going to be able to get some degree of cross-channel measurement, or we could also just say platform agnostic. And so you're not restricted to just running tests on the Meta platform. Obviously, you can run tests here about anything, and you can measure any variable. And so when we're talking about a Meta in-platform conversion lift experiment, we're just measuring conversion lift. But when you go and use a geo-lift experiment that sits outside of the platform, you can, for example, measure sessions. You could, for example, measure AOV. You could measure sales on a particular product line. Number two, and this directly correlates with the cons here, is that it is using business level metrics, which ties into number one. And so rather than relying on attribution, we are relying on actual sales figures within the business. And so there are smaller error bars associated with the assumptions being built into the model. Number three is that it's auditable and transparent. And so you can see the statistical model, you can see the assumptions, you can see the P-values, and if you're working with a data scientist, they should be able to give you greater clarity over the actual conclusion of the experiment comparative to an in-platform conversion lift experiment. And then number 4, which doesn't mean much to me, but it would guarantee mean a lot to a data scientist, is you have a customizable design. And so you can go and choose the regions, choose the duration, choose the control logic, choose the modeling techniques. In the in-platform conversion lift experiment, you have no flexibility, you have no customization. You are completely limited in the way that you are going to run this test. So it seems like geo-lift experiments are considerably better in a lot of ways. So what are the cons over here? Well, con number 1 is that, as you've probably been able to tell, considerably higher complexity. Reality is that if you're a founder watching this video, or if you're a performance marketer, it is highly unlikely that you could go and get your hands onto an open source econometric model and go and try to run your own incrementality test. I think you could do it. I've been kind of trying to do it myself, and I've obviously been upskilling in this area a lot over the course of the last 3 months. But as you start to upskill, and I challenge anyone to go and try to take an out-of-the-box model and run their own incrementality test, it does start to become very, very complex, and you generally need to rely on some kind of third-party SaaS that is delivering this for you to take the complexity out of the data science. Number 2 is it takes longer timeframes, generally speaking. So you'll often need to run an experiment for between 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the exact parameters of the data set. Number 3, it's more expensive. So running a conversion lift experiment in platform is completely free. As long as you're hitting conversion volume requirements, you just apply it onto an existing campaign and you get the data. In fact, if you have this unlocked on your account, there's no reason as to why you shouldn't be running these all the time, 24/7, all day long. You should just be collecting data. It's another data point that tells you whether your campaigns are actually incremental or not. Whether you use it, doesn't even matter. Just collect the data, have it there historically, so you have the log. When it comes to GeoLift experiments, this is going to be expensive, okay? You're either going to buy data science hours, or you're going to need to buy a software that's going to make this process easier for you. Either way, there are costs associated here. There's also the cost of that you're probably going to have to invest a significant more amount of budget to have statistical relevancy within the test in itself. And so you're not only going to have to commit to some kind of software, you're also going to have to commit to a significant increase in budgets. Number 4, and this is where the difference in difference approach versus GeoLift starts to kind of present itself, is you're going to have regional noise. And so when you're doing a GeoLift experiment, you're always restricted by the actual state-by-state fluctuations that might occur. For example, local news events, weather, any kind of localized marketing event that might occur for you, or any kind of disruption to online sales in that particular area, that's going to create noise within the data set of a GeoLift experiment. And then lastly, and I'll just bundle this into more expensive, you're also going to need higher budgets. And so reality is that to run a GeoLift experiment, you're going to need more budget, and particularly more budget to in delta on the increase than the budget requirement to unlock conversion lifts in platform. And then we have some time left in this video, so let me rattle off some of the pros and cons between difference in difference and doing GeoLift experiments. And so once again, just to clarify, with a GeoLift experiment, you are segmenting based on geography and then showing particular geographies more or less media spend, or you're making a core change to channel distribution or messaging, whatever it might be within the experiment. Whereas with difference in difference, we're actually going at an individual user level. Now, you can only ever do this within the platform because the platform has access to serve individual users different ads. So the pros over here on difference in difference is that there is no chance of any kind of regional bleed. And so what can end up happening when you run a GeoLift experiment is that the targeting might not be perfect. It might bleed out into other states, and so then it messes up the data set. When you're controlling it at individual user level, who actually sees the particular ad, you're not going to have any regional disadvantages that start to occur with GeoLift experiments. Number 2, it often delivers insights much faster. Number 3, you can track individual exposure and conversions on a more granular level. What are the actual cons here? Number 1 is that iOS tracking is going to obviously limit you here. So attribution is always going to cause issues when we're going at an individual user level. Meta doesn't expose any underlying statistical models. You just have to trust their output without visibility. And so you actually no one really truly knows how this works because it hasn't been made publicly available. So we're just trusting that this is accurate and we're putting our advertising dollars there accordingly. And then you're also trusting that there is no selection bias within here at all. And so the test and the control group need to be split completely randomly for difference in difference to actually be statistically relevant. But all difference in difference assumptions break if the test and control group has any selection bias. You don't have any visibility over selection here, and therefore you can't control and guarantee that there isn't going to be any bias risk within here. Then the pros and cons over on Geolift experiments is that it's showing you how the campaigns are actually working at a macro level. So you're removing attribution and you're looking at a store level. It's completely transparent. It doesn't rely on cookies or user level data, and you can go and include cross-channel coverage as well. And so when we're looking at these two different statistical methods, the pros and cons actually just start to translate at the entire experiment level. So this is really all applicable when it comes to the way that these two experiments are actually running. The disadvantages is that Geolift experiments take longer to run, they're technically complex, you need much more significant spend to detect lift, which is going to be a massive struggle for any kind of small brand. And then it's hard to control for confounding variables like whether local news competitors, etc., that I mentioned earlier. And so those are the core differences between in-platform lift experiments and Geolift experiments. Now, what is the conclusion here? What should you be running? What direction should you be going down? Well, if you have conversion lift experiments unlocked within your account, I'll go and check that right now. You should be running them all the time. There's no reason not to. It doesn't cost anything. You don't have to increase budgets. It's just going to take the people you are already going to target. It's going to split out a 10% control group, and then it's going to show you if there's any incremental lift. You're probably going to get some interesting data here that's either going to say, yes, your campaigns are quite incremental, or no, your campaigns are very non-incremental, which we have seen before, which then you actually might want to investigate and start to change the strategies so that they become incremental and run the test again. Now, if you are running these tests already all the time, this is when you can start to look into running a proper Geolift experiment where you now can go and invest in higher complexity, you can invest in the software, and you can go and get more statistical relevancy, or better worded, you can get more confidence in the actual result that is being delivered to you so that you can take bigger swings with increasing budgets moving forward in time on particular campaigns or on particular channels. I'll give you two really good examples of where Geolift experiments are really advantageous in comparison to just an in-platform conversion lift experiment within Meta. Number one, if you're running a different campaign type outside of conversion-based campaigns, so if you were to run a reach campaign or if you were to run a traffic campaign, the limited data set of incrementality within the Meta platform, it's really, at least from our experience, just not going to tell you that the campaigns are incremental, and so it's not really helpful. But if you're running a Geolift experiment over a long time period, you can start to draw correlation between whether different campaign types are actually contributing and are incremental to the business as a whole. Another example is YouTube ads. And so YouTube ads is something that we really struggle to run for most e-commerce brands because attribution on a YouTube ad is terrible. Now, the only way to actually prove whether YouTube ads are incremental is to run a Geolift experiment over a particular holdout period to then prove whether it's making a substantial impact to the business. Doing any kind of in-platform conversion lift experiment is never really going to help because attribution is so poor when it comes to a YouTube ad. And this also translates quite well into higher ticket items. And so if your average order value is $1,000 to $5,000, a conversion lift experiment in platform is going to start to lose its relevancy because attribution loses its relevancy as the consumer journey increases. And so if you have an average time to purchase of 20 to 30 days, a conversion lift experiment on the platform is probably not going to be anywhere near as insightful as running a Geolift experiment.